Here's the basis of Gerard Batten. Why do I support UKIP? The answer directly now is because of Gerard Batten. Gerard Batten is a constitutionalist. He's wrote books on the Constitution. And what he actually, there's only one disagreement I've got with him. He says we should repeal the European Communities Act of 1972. I believe it should be made void. And there is a difference. It should never have been enacted in the first place. It is unlawful. It is unconstitutional. It is wholly against our constitution. We can prove that. We can prove it should never have been enacted in the first place. I have got documentation here to say that our independent judiciary can and should strike it down. Let me explain to people in layman's terms, because I am a layman, of what I actually mean by that and why it should be made void, right? First of all, there is a very simple element to this, and that is that we have an independent judiciary. Now, some time ago, in 2001, I believe it was, it may have been 2002, there was a case that was brought before the High Court. It was basically Regina versus Sunderland. In other words, the Queen versus Sunderland. Sunderland being Sunderland Council, and there was a group of merchants or marketeers or whatever you want to call them. I want people in America to understand exactly what I'm talking about here. So basically, imagine going to your local supermarket or market, and there's a guy standing there in front of you, and he's saying, roll up, come along, come and buy your pound of bananas. Come on, baby, here you go. $5, pound of bananas, there you go, right? Puts them in a little weighing machine, right? On either side of the weighing machine, he's got a pound, yeah? And I mean a pound in weight. He puts it on that side, puts his bananas on that side, the scales go like that, it's even, you've got a pound of bananas for your $5, right? Bang, there's your $5. Lovely lady, thank you very much. See you later, enjoy your bananas, right? Along comes Little Hitler, right? From the local authority, from the local state authority, not the federal, but the local state, right? And they come along and they say, here, mate. And he looks at me and he says, yeah. And they say to him, you ain't allowed to do that. What do you mean I'm not allowed to do it? I've done it all my life. My grandfather done it. My great-great-grandfather done it. What do you mean I can't do it? You can't do what? And they turned around to him and they said, you can't sell a pound of bananas for $5. So the guys looked at him and said, what do you want about? You want drugs or something? And he said, no, because of the weights and measures, yeah, you now are not allowed to sell a pound of bananas. You can only sell 1 kilo of bananas, right? So this guy's turned around and said, up yours. See you later. And they said, okay, we're going to call the policeman because it's a criminal offence. So the guys turned around and said, what you talking about? Criminal offence. I'm earning a living, right? This is actually true, right? This is what happens. Along comes PC Plod, along comes the local authority, Trading Standards. We want you to arrest him. Trading Standards offence that he is now selling a pound of bananas when he should be selling a kilo of bananas. And by the way, I've made a video of this and got a bunch of bananas on my shoulder, right? Right, then what happens? It goes to the county court. County court turns around and says, this is such a controversial issue that we can't deal with it, and we're going to hand it over to the High Court. Goes up to the High Court. The High Court then makes a decision. The High Court states that the Weights and Measures Act, I believe it was of 1985, was basically superseded, and it was superseded by a constitutional statute, and it was called the European Communities Act of 1972. Now, what elevated it to constitutional status was a referendum in 1975. Now, for those who are astute amongst you, I want you to think about what I just said. The European Communities Act of 1972 was elevated to constitutional status by a referendum in 1975. Do I need to say that to you again, or do you get what I'm saying? Right? They didn't have the referendum until 3 years after they'd actually joined the European Union, right? There's a reason for that. It's because it was an afterthought, because they realised, oh my God, this is unconstitutional. We're in the shit, right? That's exactly why they did it. And then they set about with the mainstream media to con the people into believing that this had nothing to do with sovereignty. When Edward Heath and his merry little men had got reports saying they will lose their sovereignty by the year 2000, right? Now, lucky enough, it hadn't gone that far because there was a few obstacles in the way stopping the European Nazi plan, right? But let's get back to the original story. It then goes to Lord Chief Justice Laws, who is the top justice. And he says this: because the European Communities Act of 1972 was elevated to constitutional status in 1975, that means that any of the provisions that are made under it are also constitutional. And therefore, that the European Communities Act of 1972 has subjugated the laws of this land for European law. That's exactly what's happened. And therefore, the 1985 Weights and Measures Act is unlawful as it goes against the constitution of this country, which is part of the European Communities Act of 1972, because of it being elevated by referendum, right? Now, anyone thinking about this, understand this and understand it clearly, yeah? That was the first effing referendum. I'm going to say it again to people. I want you to listen to me. That was the first effing referendum, right? That was in 1975. We waited till 2016 to have the second referendum, which we've just had, right? Which we've had 40 odd years of knowing exactly what them people done to us. And I was only 8 years old at the time. Do I hold grudges? Yes, I do, because it's the same crooks in power in there at the moment as it was then, who conned us, right? In 2002, with that particular ruling, the judge said this, right, that it's been elevated to constitutional status because of the referendum in 1975, right? Now I want people to think. I want you to listen to what I am saying, yeah? When we had the second referendum in June 2016, June 23rd to be precise, what happened? Do you want me to tell you what happened? Do you know why they're all shitting themselves? Because a layperson like me understands it, Gerard Batten understands it, and there's hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of others out there that understand it. Do you know what it is that they understand? The constitutional lock has been removed. The second referendum on the 23rd of June 2016, that referendum took the double bolt off the door. Now they're shitting themselves because they've got no protection. All it takes is a barrister to stand up in our High Court and say, this is unconstitutional. All we want you to do is reverse the judgment. We want you to void the European Communities Act of 1972 because you can. Because it is no longer a constitutional status. Because it is no longer part of the constitution of this country. Because we had a second referendum on the 23rd of June 2016. There is your answer. And guess who gets it? Gerard Batten gets it. Why is he being vilified? Why is UKIP being vilified? Why are people like me being vilified? Because we stand for the rule of law. our judiciary, our Supreme Court has been controlled by those Nazis in Brussels. Unlike the United States of America, we haven't got a military that swears to protect the Constitution against foreign and domestic enemies. We haven't got a president in this country or a queen that will stand up and take back control of our Constitution, unlike those in the United States of America. You have got that. That's the difference. So I'm hoping I have now explained to people why I'm so passionate about our Constitution, why it is that I understand that lock has now been removed. If I get it, why don't these other people get it? If I get it as a layperson, and it is simple, it's not difficult, right? And now let me explain to you the difference between a repeal and a void, right? When you repeal something, up until the point you repealed it, it stays in force or stayed in force, right? If you void something, it becomes erased from history, as if it had never existed. So just to give you an example, if you get someone who goes to be married, for example, in the sight of God, and they stand up within a church, which is a ceremonized system and contract, right? It's ceremonized. It is the top contract because it's before God, right? You're asked a simple question. Is there any lawful impediment that stops you being man and wife? And does anyone in the congregation know of any lawful impediment, right? So let me just put it this way. Joe Bloggs stands up and says, yeah, he's married. And the minister will turn around to that person and say, and there has never been a divorce. And the guy in the congregation says, no, he's married to my sister. He's never been divorced and she's still alive. So therefore this marriage is null and void, right? Well, it ain't null and void. It just can't ever happen. And it won't happen. And he can be prosecuted for attempted bigamy, right? Because he never, but if he had carried on and married, he would have then committed the offence of bigamy, right? So that marriage would never have, it can only be annulled. It can never have existed. It's never allowed to exist in law, right? Well, that's the same as when you void, if you void a law because that law is unconstitutional. For example, and I'll give you a silly example, but it is really, if one of the reasons why they will never legalise euthanasia, right, is because it goes against natural law and God's law. And that is that you cannot murder, or thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not kill, yeah, another human being, and that includes yourself, yeah. That's why they could never ever make that a law. Doesn't even. Sometimes I agree that someone is so far gone and in agony and in pain, and it's the best thing all round for them. Why would God want him to suffer or her to suffer? Yeah. So I do see things like that, and it's very much different to a baby or a fetus, someone who has life, but is still within the womb and the protection of the mother and the protection of society, really, and of God. Yeah. I'm strongly pro-life. Trust me. The difference is at the end of a life, if someone's in their 90s, they're in a vegetative state, they're banging trouble in more ways than one. They've lived 90 years of their life, and they decide that they want to take their own life and move on or whatever. What I'm trying to say to you is that in law that could never happen in a Christian country. And the reason why it can never happen is because you cannot legislate against God's law. You can't. God's law says, "Thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not kill." yeah, you can't then make certain types of murder legal, which again is a bit of a strange concept for America because you've got the death penalty. And one of the reasons why we haven't got the death penalty in England anymore, they've stopped it, is simply because it goes against what we believe to be God's will. And God's will, even if you want to bang them up for the next 120 years and they're only expected to live 60 of it, but you're giving them another 60 on top just to make sure, they will never, ever be released. That's the difference. I hope I'm not rambling with this and you understand what's going on. So what I'm going to do now is just check my messages. Let me check my messages while I'm having a chin wag. Let's have a look and see what we've got going on. So are you guys on the EU now? So are you guys out of the EU? No, we're not out of the EU. I wonder what the comments was when I was throwing a mini wobbler. Let's have a look. Blood. Oh, look, send it. Blood pressure. Daddy Dragon, relax. Yeah, I know. I do get stressed about it. I won't have another heart attack. I promise you that. I do have to control my breathing though. It's quite funny. I've seen all of that information. Sending my prayers of support for you all. So, but again, getting back to that, without all I'm doing is saying to you, do you understand that? And as a lay person, it's not difficult to work it out, right? That the first referendum was in 1975. The European Communities Act is of 1972. It therefore become law a year later in 1973, right? So 3 years later, they decided to have a referendum because they knew it was unconstitutional, unlawful, right? You can't, no matter what you do after that position, you can't make it legal, you can't make it lawful by, after the act of unlawfulness, you do something to try and make it lawful. It don't work, right? And it certainly don't work because you've lied to the people about the actual real outcome of the referendum. You've lied to the people about the sovereignty of the nation. You've lied to the people about so many different things. It's become one big fraud. And that's exactly what it is, right? So imagine then getting to 2002, having the conversation with a geezer I just explained, he's at the market and he sells a pound of bananas and they come along and said, it's got to be a kilo. And he's saying, like, I've always sold it in a pound. I'm going to carry on selling it in a pound as bananas. That, I don't sell kilos. I'm English. And they arrest him for it. They charge him for it. It's actually a criminal offence. It's the first time ever that this guy's ever been done for a crime. And he's standing there earning a living. And that's what went to court. And then it went to Lord Chief Justice Laws. That was the ruling. And that is the ruling that can be used by us, by Brexiteers, to say that was the ruling then that the European Communities Act of 1972 had been given constitutional status by a referendum. And therefore, by the same ruling of Lord Chief Justice Laws and the same logic, you've actually reversed the position. So now the European Communities Act of 1972 is now what's known as an ordinary statute. And because it is an ordinary statute and not a constitutional statute, it can be repealed / made void. There are further reasons why I would say it can become void, and I'm going to give you an example of that. The UK Parliament only become in existence because of the Acts of Union 1706, 1707. It's called the Acts, plural, of Union, 1706, 1707. That's when the Scottish Parliament and the English Parliament, and yes, it was an English Parliament, became void, and they amalgamated and come into one Parliament, which was the Palace of Westminster, which was the Parliament of the United Kingdom. So the Parliament of the United Kingdom was actually created by two Acts of Parliament from 1706 and 1707, right? That basically stopped the two separate parliaments and brought them together under one. So therefore, the UK Parliament itself, believe it or not, was created by an Act of Parliament or Acts of Parliament, which is how it's been created. There's a reason why that's important, because of the Acts of Parliament and what it states about England, Scotland, and the rest of our constitution. We can actually use that as a defence of the nation state, and in relation to the European Union and the European Communities Act of 1972.